Ed here with the Digital Digest, and today I wanted to share a quick comparison between the Sony A7 Mark III and the Sony A6500. Now, of course, different cameras. We've got a full frame, brand new offering from Sony. Tough to get your hands on it at present. It's still back ordered, sold out pretty much everywhere, and for good reason. This $2,000 camera is pretty much a monster. It can do everything and anything outside of course, what the A9 and A7R Mark III have to offer, which is more speed with the A9 and, of course, more resolution with the A7R Mark III. But if you took the lesser of each of those cameras, put them in the exact same body, downgraded the EVF, that's what we're looking at here. Great buffer. I mean, you have dual SD card slots, of course limited to one UHS 1 and a UHS 2 slot. Incredible battery life with the FZ100 battery type. So really just an all-around camera that can do everything, and in my opinion changes the landscape at 2,000 US dollars in terms of expectations of what you can get anywhere in the world for your money. The A6500 did the same for the APS-C world. Now you can see I've got the Zeiss 55 f1.8 full frame E-mount lens on here, and it happens to be quite a good fit, but I generally shoot a wide angle 10 to 18 APS-C on this camera. But the reason I'm comparing these is because they're close in price. I believe the A6500 now you can find for it might be $1,200. It originally was $1,400. The point is that even though it's not $1,000 price difference, so anything less than $1,000 makes me want to compare them. And I think that people inherently will be comparing them or considering moving from the A6500 to the A7 Mark III, which is a logical move by all means, unless size is your enemy. So let me make that very clear right now. If you prefer size, the smaller form factor of the APS-C 24 megapixel censored A6500, go with it. It is a bargain at its current price. Yes, it does not have the autofocus prowess or battery life of the A7 Mark III. It, of course, is not full frame either, but it is worth every penny. Both of these cameras are fantastic solutions, but of course, one is clearly geared towards professionals, which is the A7 Mark III, even though it's the entry-level pro piece of gear from Sony's mirrorless interchangeable DI business. The other, of course, is targeted at a little bit of both. There are pros that love this camera and amateurs and hobbyists alike. And the same pretty much does apply to the A7 Mark III, but it does have, as I mentioned before, far superior autofocus system. The autofocus system you're going to find in the A6500 is very similar to what you would find in the A7R Mark II, Mark III. So 425 points of phase detection. Here we've got 693. 93% of that sensor is covered. 10 frames per second. Here I believe we're at 11 frames per second. But again, full frame, not full frame, more accurate autofocus. Both have 5-axis image stabilization. Both have touch to focus on the displays on the rear, but both are incredibly different in terms of body type. And don't forget, critical element, as I keep mentioning, battery life. Because the battery life on the A7 Mark III, you're looking at a little under 700 shots with the FZ100 battery. Here, with the A6500, you're not going to it's going to be roughly half. Let's be real, roughly half. Again, form factor is really what the A6500 has in its favor, as well as pricing. I still love it. It's coming with me on my trip, and that's because for its size, and then the ability to throw on something like this 10 to 18 wide-angle APS-C lens. It's really just, in my opinion, a keeper in every way, shape, and form. Now, different screens, different EVFs. Neither is amazing. In other words, the EVF here is not as good as what you'll find with the A9 or A7R Mark III, but still very good. It's not even as good as what you'll find with the A7R Mark II. With the A6500, you have also a good EVF, but again, not top of the class. This is not that sort of situation. So the autofocus system in here is the best right now you're going to find in the world of APS-C. Sony is rumored to be launching an A6700 soon, so if you can wait, I recommend waiting. But again, this video is about which one of these is right for you. And I think it should be fairly obvious. The video button did move from the right side of the body over here, which was not a fan favorite, to the right side of the EVF. I personally prefer the center-mounted EVF over the left mounted EVF because I am left eye dominant and do not love pressing my face up against a screen, let alone a touch screen. Yes, you can turn that off, of course, but it still never really made sense to me. But considering the form factor of the A6500, I am not complaining. Now, of course, more pro features on here, dual SD card slots, single here, no joystick on the back of this, whereas, of course, with the A7 Mark III, you have the joystick, you have the redesign, you're getting what the professional current crop of Sony full-frame cameras has to offer. So that may be the selling point for you, besides the fact that it is full-frame. It really does have a lot going for it. So in my opinion, and I did say this would be a quick review, and that's because it should be, if you have to have full frame, if you have to have the extra battery life, if you have to have, obviously, the far superior autofocus system that's going to net more keepers and the ergonomics of the full-frame A7 Mark III, that is what you should be buying at $2,000. And, of course, the price of this camera will eventually go down. It just came out. Bear that in mind. However, if you are a fan still of the small form factor, which is where E-mount really truly began. So only, in my opinion, shifted to larger bodies because they saw that smaller cameras like this was not where they were going to make their money because these were too close to, at least in people's minds, being more like point-and-shoot cameras, even though they were interchangeable and, of course, had much larger sensors. People still associated them with the point-and-shoot market, which, of course, has been pretty much killed by smartphones. Which Sony puts most of the sensors in, especially if you own an iPhone, you're shooting Sony. Congratulations, whether you knew it or not. That's why you love your images. So what it comes down to is, really, in my opinion, form factor. For me personally, because I have the A7R Mark III, I am holding on to my A6500. I'm very curious to see what Sony does with the A6700 or A7000, whatever they name it. I could make predictions on what I anticipate will come, but that's not what today's video is about. It's about, again, which is the right camera for you. And in my opinion, if form factor is the most important thing to you, you should be picking up the A6500. It'll save you some money. That's if you cannot wait for whatever the refresh is going to be. And then in addition to that, you are getting the capability to use any full frame glass with this camera, which I highly recommend. Even if you go APS-C, buy the full frame glass because you never know when you're going to want to upgrade, to Sony's latest and greatest. For example, the A7 Mark III, which isn't that far away in price, but now all of your native full frame lenses will act exactly as such. So both great at 4K, both great at still, but as you know, full frame, better dynamic range here on the left, better autofocusing, better battery life, even the I/O ports superior here. You're not going to get blown away by either EVF or the touchscreen capability. You do have play memories, I believe, still incorporated into the A6500, which I like a lot. I think that's a great thing. Sony's done away with it since then because I think this was the last camera that it was integrated into. It's not even in the RX10 line anymore, which is a CyberShot camera. So clearly Sony has moved away from that, and I understand why. They want more pro-grade centric features and not gimmicks that they think will drive pros away from their cameras. And I guess Play Memories was just one of those things, or they never saw the profit from it that they were expecting. But both of these cameras are great. You're not going to go wrong with either one. And the only reason, again, that I am shooting this comparison is because even right now in prepping for my trip, I have ruled the A7 Mark III out. I'm about to go away on a much-needed vacation. And I would rather have the A6500 in my bag to complement the A7R Mark III than the A7 Mark III, where I see an overlap. Of course, if you don't have an A7R Mark III or an A9, then the A7 Mark III has its place because it just does everything very well. Now, it's not without flaws. It does have a striping issue. It does... Beyond that, the EVF I wish was more competent in terms of resolution, because I do wear glasses. I like to use EVFs, especially if I'm throwing in contacts. But otherwise, I have nothing negative to say about this camera. The A6500 has shortcomings, but that's a given at its price point, because much like the A7 Mark III, it changed the landscape for what you could expect from a mirrorless APS-C or Micro Four Thirds camera. Because it was game-changing with its 5-axis image stabilization, touch to focus, and again, at the time, fastest autofocus and most comprehensive autofocus that is a hybrid system, both phase and contrast, available in a body of its size. And that's the reason I'm not ditching it under any circumstance, at least until we see what Sony has up their sleeve next, which I can only imagine is going to hopefully borrow the new battery type, the FZ100, so that we double our battery life, which could be a game breaker for some of you out there. It really depends. As well as hopefully a dual SD card slot. That would be nice, but Sony may reserve that. Also, bear in mind, this does have a flash. This does not. Another clear differentiation between Pro versus non, but that's not to say a Pro couldn't shoot with the A6500. Clients just may not think much of them since the camera is so small, but don't be fooled. The camera's performance is still, in my opinion, one of the best balances of still and video you're going to find, especially if form factor is what you are after. But that pretty much rounds things out. I didn't take you through the I/O ports because, again, this really boils down to what you're looking for. In my opinion, that all comes down to form factor. If you're looking to keep it light, stick with the A6500. If you don't care about the size of the body, the A7 Mark III has every advantage over the A6500. Of course, starting with the sensor and then moving through the autofocus battery life, I/O ports. It checks every box is what it comes down to. And the striping, which I mentioned in my full review of the A7 Mark III, can always be corrected in post. It's an issue. It's not a severe issue. And who knows, maybe it's something Sony will address, although I have not heard anything through the grapevine. It's possible. You never know. Hope you all enjoyed the video. Any questions or comments, please feel free to post them. Hit that like button, and as usual, please feel free to subscribe. Later.